They said she brought the devil's child into her belly. But the real sin was that she refused to name the father. The house stood at the edge of Salvation Bend, like a rotten tooth. Adobe walls, the color of old bone. Roof tiles cracked and missing in patches where the rain got in. Nobody had lived there for 3 years, not since the widow Garrett died, mumbling prayers nobody understood. Now it belonged to Marla Keene, though belonged wasn't quite the word. Cast out. That's what her father had done. Cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and the swelling beneath her apron that made the church women cross themselves and spit. She was 17. Her belly was 6 months round. The door hung crooked on its leather hinges. Marla pushed it open with her shoulder, and dust rose up like the ghosts were making room. The floor was packed dirt, hard as stone. One window, small and square, let in a shaft of November light that showed her everything. A broken chair, a rusted pot, a straw mattress, stained dark with something she didn't want to name. She set down her bundle, a wool blanket, a tin cup, a Bible her mother had slipped into her hands without meeting her eyes. The silence in the house was thick. Outside, the wind moved through the mesquite trees, with a sound like rattling bones. Her feet ached. Her back ached. The baby pressed against her ribs. She had walked 4 miles from her father's ranch, past neighbors who turned their faces away, past the general store, where Mr. Howell watched her through the window, with his mouth set in a hard line, past the church, white and clean, where Reverend Thorne had stood on the steps and declared her an abomination before God and man. "You will name him," her father had said, his voice like iron. "You will name the man who did this, or you will leave my house." But she couldn't, because the man was dead, because the man had been her father's foreman, and he'd put his hands on her in the barn one August evening when the heat made everything slow and heavy. Because when she'd fought him, he'd held her down in the straw and told her it didn't matter what she wanted. Because 2 weeks later, his horse had thrown him and crushed his skull against a fence post, and everyone said it was God's judgment for something, though they didn't know what. And because, if she told them, they'd say she was lying. They'd say she tempted him. They'd say worse things about a dead man's name than they already said about her. So she said nothing. And her father had pointed to the door. Marla moved to the back of the house, where the bedroom was, smaller than a horse stall. The walls were rough adobe, handprints still visible in the mud and straw mixture from when someone had built this place long ago. She ran her fingers over them. Small hands, maybe a woman's, maybe a child's. That's when she saw it. One section of the wall, low near the floor, had a different texture. Newer mud, patched over. And at the edge, where the repair met the old wall, something pale jutted out. Paper. Her heart kicked. She knelt, her belly making it awkward, and worked her fingers into the crack. The dried mud crumbled easily. She pulled, and a folded piece of paper came free, yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, done in faded ink. If you are reading this, you are like me. They will come for you. Do not let them take you to the fire. There is a way. The rest was torn away. Marla's hands shook. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called out sharp and lonely. She stared at the words until the light began to fail. The letter spoke of fire, but Marla would learn that shame burned hotter than any flame. She slept poorly that first night, curled on the straw mattress with the letter pressed against her chest like a talisman. The baby moved inside her, restless, and she wondered if it could feel her fear. When dawn came gray and cold through the broken window, she rose stiff and aching, her breath misting in the air. The town had rules. Reverend Thorne had made them clear before her father dragged her away. She could not come to church. She could not draw water from the public well. She could not speak to decent women or walk past the schoolhouse when children were present. She was permitted to exist, barely, on the sufferance of Christian mercy, but only if she wore the mark. Marla found it waiting on her doorstep that morning, a square of white cloth with a red letter painted on it. S for sin, for shame, for the scarlet woman from the Bible stories. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The paint was still tacky, smelling of linseed oil and iron oxide. Someone had come in the night and left it there, quiet as a curse. She was meant to pin it to her dress. Wear it always. Let everyone know what she was. Instead, she folded it and tucked it into her apron pocket where no one could see. The creek ran a half-mile east, past the old hanging tree where they'd strung up a horse thief 5 years back. Marla walked with her head down, the empty tin cup in her hand, her shawl pulled tight against the November wind. The earth was hard beneath her feet, scattered with mesquite thorns that caught at her skirt. She was filling her cup when she heard the horse. The rider came around the cottonwood grove, slow and easy, a rangy dun gelding with a blaze face and scarred knees. The man in the saddle was lean and weathered, maybe 40, with a gray-shot beard and eyes the color of creek stone. He wore a battered cavalry coat, Union blue faded to almost gray, and a wide-brimmed hat stained dark with years of sweat and rain. He pulled up when he saw her. His gaze moved to her belly, then to her face. He didn't look away. "Creek's free water," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "You don't need permission." Marla straightened. "I wasn't asking for any." "Good." He swung down from the saddle with the stiffness of old wounds. Up close, she could see the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, white and puckered. "Town says you're meant to wear a mark." Her hand went to her pocket. "Town says a lot of things." "They do." He moved to the creek, let his horse drink. "Name's Caleb Royce. I run cattle on the western section, near the Badlands. Used to, anyway. Lost most of my herd to drought last year." She didn't know why he was telling her this. Didn't know why he was talking to her at all. Men in Salvation Bend had been giving her wide berth for 2 months now, like she carried plague. "They'll punish you," Marla said quietly, "for speaking to me." "They can try." Caleb straightened, water dripping from his canteen. "I was at Shiloh. Watched boys younger than you bleed out in the mud, while preachers back home wrote letters about God's righteous judgment. I don't put much stock in what towns say anymore." The baby kicked. Marla pressed a hand to her side, and Caleb saw it. Something flickered in his face. Not pity, but recognition. Like he knew what it was to carry a burden that showed. "The widow Garrett," he said. "The woman who lived in that house before you. They called her a witch." Marla's breath caught. Why? Because she knew things. Herbs, remedies, helped women with difficult births. His jaw tightened. Helped women who didn't want to carry. That was enough. They ran her out of town proper, same as you. She died alone in that house, and nobody would bury her in consecrated ground. The letter. If you are reading this, You are like me." "Did you know her?" Marla asked. "Some. She was kind to me once, when I came back from the war all torn up inside." Caleb looked at the house in the distance, small and crooked against the pale sky. "She said there were others before her. Women the town decided weren't fit. Always a house on the edge. Always a mark they had to wear." Marla pulled the cloth from her pocket, let it unfold in the wind. The red S seemed to glow in the thin morning light. Caleb's expression hardened. "You don't have to wear that." "If I don't, they'll what?" "You're already cast out. Already alone." He took a step closer, and his voice dropped. "I've seen what shame does when you let it brand you. It burns deeper than any iron. Don't give them that power." For a long moment they stood there by the creek, the wind moving through the grass, the water running cold and clear over the stones. Then Marla walked to the remains of a dead campfire someone had left in the creek bed. Black stones in a circle, white ash in the center. She knelt carefully, her belly making it awkward, and placed the white cloth on the ashes. Caleb handed her a lucifer match without a word. The cloth caught quickly. The red paint bubbled and blackened, and smoke rose thin and gray into the morning sky. They watched it burn to nothing. "They'll bring another," Marla said. "Then you'll burn that one too." Caleb gathered his horse's reins. "I'll be back in 2 days, bringing supplies. You'll need firewood before the cold sets in proper." "Why would you?" "Because I can." He swung into the saddle, wincing. "Because I should have helped the widow Garrett, and I didn't. Because a man's got to stand for something, or he's just taking up space." He turned the horse and rode west, toward the Badlands, leaving Marla alone by the creek with the ashes of her shame scattered on the water. When she returned to the house, she found the letter again and read it by the gray morning light, looking for the rest of the message. There had to be more. There had to be. She began pulling at the wall where the paper had been hidden, and more dried mud crumbled away. Behind it, carved into the adobe brick itself, were words, "The root cellar," beneath the stone with the cross. Some secrets are buried to protect the living, and some are buried because the dead have no other voice. The root cellar was outside, half hidden behind a tangle of dead blackberry vines that tore at Marla's hands when she pushed through. She hadn't noticed it before. The entrance was just a slanted wooden door set into the earth, weathered gray and warped with age. Rust-eaten hinges screamed when she pulled it open. The smell rose up first, damp earth, old rot, and something else. Something that made her stomach turn. She waited for her eyes to adjust to the darkness below, one hand pressed to her belly, the other gripping the doorframe. Stone steps led down. 6 of them, narrow and uneven. She should have waited for Caleb. Should have brought a lamp. But the words carved in the wall had lit a fire in her chest that wouldn't be put out. The root cellar, beneath the stone with the cross. Marla descended carefully, her boots scraping on stone. The cellar was small, maybe 8 feet square, with a dirt floor and walls of stacked rock. Wooden shelves lined one side, empty except for broken mason jars and the desiccated husk of something that might have been a potato sack. The air was cold and thick, hard to breathe. And there, in the center of the floor, a flat stone, larger than the others, with a crude cross scratched into its surface. She knelt, her knees sinking into the soft earth around it, and tried to move the stone. It was heavy, but loose. It scraped and shifted, and beneath it, a hollow space. And inside, wrapped in rotted canvas, bones, small bones, a skull no bigger than her two fists together. Marla's breath stopped. The baby kicked hard, as if it felt her horror. Not just bones. There was something else. A scrap of fabric, once white. A tiny shoe, handmade from soft leather. And beneath it all, another letter. This one sealed with wax that had somehow survived the damp. Her hands shook as she broke the seal and unfolded the brittle paper. My name was Sarah Garrett. Before that, it was Sarah Clemens. Before that, I had no name they would speak aloud. I was 15 when they brought me to Salvation Bend. Brought me in a wagon with my hands tied because I ran when they came for me. They said I lay with a man before marriage. They said I brought shame to my family. The truth was simpler and worse. My father's brother forced himself on me, and when I told, they called me a liar. I bore the child in this house, alone. It was a girl. She lived 3 days. I buried her here because they would not let me bury her in the churchyard. They said unbaptized children of sin had no place in consecrated ground. They said her soul was already damned. I marked the stones so I would remember where she lay. So someone, someday, might know she existed. If you are reading this, sister, you are where I was. They have cast you out. They have marked you. And they will do worse if you let them. There is a way out, but it requires fire and blood and the courage to become what they already say you are. In the wall of the main room, behind the broken chair, there is a loose stone. Behind that stone is my grandmother's book. She was Choctaw, from the old country, before the trails. She knew things the white preachers feared, things about birth and death, and the power women carry in their bodies. They will come for you when your time comes. They will want to watch you suffer. They will want to see if God punishes you with death or pain, because they believe that is justice. Do not let them. Use what is in the book. And when you are strong enough, when your child is safe, burn the mark they gave you. Bury it with the shame they tried to make you carry. Plant something over it. Let it grow. You are not alone, sister. You never were. We are the women at the edge. We are the ones who survive. The letter was signed with a handprint, pressed in faded ink. Marla sat back on her heels, tears hot on her face. The bones of Sarah Garrett's baby daughter lay in the canvas at her feet. And above, in the house, there was a book hidden in the walls. Knowledge, power, something the town had tried to erase. She heard horses then, multiple horses, coming fast. Marla scrambled up the steps, her heart hammering. Through the open cellar door, she could see them, 5 riders, led by Reverend Thorne, on his tall black gelding. They pulled up in front of the house, and the Reverend dismounted with the slow certainty of a man who believed God rode on his shoulder. He was tall and thin, dressed in black, with a Bible in one hand and a coiled rope in the other. Behind him, Deputy Marshal Vickers, Mr. Howell from the general store, and 2 ranch hands Marla recognized from her father's spread. One of them carried a wooden sign painted with words she couldn't read from this distance. "Marla Keene," Reverend Thorne's voice cut through the wind. "You were instructed to wear the mark of your sin. You have disobeyed the judgment of this community." She stood frozen by the cellar door, half hidden by the blackberry vines. "We have brought a reminder." He held up the rope, and Marla saw now that it was looped at one end, a noose already tied. Not to hang her, not yet, but to put around her neck, to lead her, to parade her through town like livestock. The wooden sign one of the ranch hands carried read, "Whore." "You will wear this rope," the Reverend continued, "and you will walk through Salvation Bend, so that all may see what becomes of wickedness. You will stand in the church square for 3 hours, and you will repent, or you will be driven from this territory entirely. Those are the terms of Christian mercy." Deputy Vicker shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable, but he said nothing. Mr. Howell stared at the ground. The ranch hands just waited, their faces blank. Marla's hands clenched into fists. The baby was heavy inside her, pressing down, and her back ached, and she was so tired of being afraid. But Sarah Garrett's words burned in her mind. "Do not let them." "No," Marla said. Her voice was small, but it carried. Reverend Thorne's expression darkened. "You refuse?" "I refuse." "Then you refuse God's mercy, and you will face His judgment." He started toward her, the rope in his hands, and the other men followed. That's when Caleb Royce rode around the side of the house on his dun gelding, a rifle laid across his saddle. He didn't point it at anyone, didn't need to. The message was clear. "That's close enough, Reverend," Caleb said quietly. Thorne stopped. "This is not your concern, Royce. I'm making it my concern. This woman is a sinner and an abomination. The community has decided—" "The community," Caleb interrupted, his voice hard as creekstone, "can go to hell." For a moment, nobody moved. The wind rattled through the mesquite, and somewhere a crow called out. Then from the road behind the riders, a small voice. "She didn't do nothing wrong." Everyone turned. A girl stood there, maybe 9 years old, in a faded calico dress and bare feet. Marla recognized her, Emma Howell, the storekeeper's daughter. "Emma!" her father hissed. "Get back to the wagon!" But Emma didn't move. "Mama said so. She told Mrs. Carson that Miss Marla never hurt nobody, and it was wrong what they done to her." Another voice, older. "Child speaks truth." An elderly Choctaw woman emerged from the brush near the creek, bent with age, her gray hair in a long braid. Marla had seen her before, selling herbs and woven baskets on the edge of town. White folks called her Old Mary, though that wasn't her real name. "The girl carries life," Old Mary said, her English slow and careful. "That is not sin. That is the way of things." Reverend Thorne's face flushed red. These are not matters for heathens and children to decide." But the crack had formed. Deputy Vickers cleared his throat. "Reverend, maybe we ought to—" "Silence!" Thorne rounded on his men. "Are you all so weak, so willing to let wickedness flourish?" No one answered. Mr. Howell reached down and pulled his daughter onto his horse, turning it away. The ranch hands exchanged glances, and Caleb. Royce still sat there, rifle ready, his creekstone eyes fixed on the Reverend. "Leave," Caleb said softly, "and don't come back." Reverend Thorne stood there, the rope in his hands, his face twisted with rage, and something else, impotence, the loss of control. Finally, he threw the rope to the ground, mounted his horse, and spurred it hard. The others followed. When the dust settled, Marla sank to her knees in the dirt, shaking so hard she thought she might break apart. Caleb dismounted and crouched beside her. He didn't touch her, just waited. "There's a book," Marla whispered, "hidden in the wall, and a baby's bones in the cellar, and I don't know what to do." "Then we figure it out," Caleb said. "Together." Old Mary approached slowly, her dark eyes kind. "The widow Garrett was my sister's daughter," she said. "I can help you, child, when your time comes. I know the old ways." Marla looked up at them. this broken soldier and this ancient woman, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, knowledge passed between women, is more dangerous than any weapon because it can't be taken by force, only given by choice. They found the book 3 days later, after Marla had strength enough to tear apart the wall where Sarah Garrett's letter had directed. The stone came loose with a grinding sound, and behind it, wrapped in oiled leather that had kept the damp away, a journal bound in deer hide, its pages covered in 2 kinds of handwriting. The first was neat and careful, English words mixed with Choctaw, drawings of plants with their roots and leaves labeled, instructions for teas and poultices and tinctures. Sarah Garrett's grandmother had written this part, before the trails of tears, before the government men came and took the land. The second handwriting was shakier, more desperate. Sarah Garrett herself, adding her own notes, recipes for easing birth pains, ways to stop bleeding, how to turn a baby in the womb when it came wrong. And at the very end, in handwriting that trembled across the page, they call this witchcraft. But it is only knowledge. It is only women helping women survive. Marla read it by candlelight, while Caleb repaired the roof, and old Mary gathered herbs from the creek bed. The winter was coming hard. Frost already silvered the ground each morning, and the wind carried the smell of distant snow from the mountains. Her belly had dropped lower. The baby would come soon. "You should go to the doctor in Piedmont," Caleb said one evening, watching her wince as she stood from the table he'd built from scrap lumber. "It's a 2-day ride, but they have a proper—" "No." Marla's voice was firm. "They'll ask questions. They'll want to know about the father. They'll want to send word to my family, to the Reverend. And if something goes wrong—" She didn't finish, but they both knew. If she died in a proper town, with proper witnesses, they'd bury her in unhallowed ground and take the baby to an orphanage. If the baby even lived. Old Mary settled into the chair by the fire, her gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of pine needle tea. "I have brought 9 children into this world," she said. "Lost only 1. The old ways work, if you trust them." Caleb looked between them, his jaw tight. "And if something goes wrong here?" "Then I die where I choose," Marla said quietly. "Free." He didn't argue after that. The rope Reverend Thorne had brought still lay in the dirt outside, half buried by blown leaves. Marla went out one cold afternoon and pulled it from the ground. The noose was cruelly tied, the knot tight and professional. Whoever made it had done this before. She brought it inside and laid it on the table. "I want to burn it," she said, "with the cloth, with all of it." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we'll need a proper fire." They built a cairn of stones behind the house, where Sarah Garrett's baby lay buried. Marla dug up the small bones carefully, wrapped them in clean linen, and placed them in a wooden box Caleb carved from cedar. They buried the box deeper, in a better grave, and old Mary sang over it in Choctaw, words Marla didn't understand, but felt in her bones. Then they built the fire. Marla threw the rope in first. It writhed in the flames like something living, the fibers blackening and curling, smoke rising thick and oily. Then the wooden sign that said, "Whore." Caleb had found it discarded by the road and brought it back. It caught quickly, the paint bubbling and peeling. And finally, every piece of cloth marked with the red letter S that had appeared on her doorstep over the past weeks. 7 of them. She'd kept them all, folded in a drawer, like evidence of a crime. They burned together, and Marla stood watching until there was nothing left but ash and the clean smell of cedar smoke. "Plant something here," Old Mary said, handing her a small pouch. "Hollyhock seeds. They grow tall and strong, even in poor soil. By summer, this place will be covered in flowers." Marla took the seeds, her throat tight. That night, the pains began. They started low in her back, a deep ache that spread around her sides like hands squeezing. Marla woke in the darkness, her shift damp with sweat, and knew her time had come. "Caleb," she called out. He'd been sleeping in the main room, on a bedroll by the fire. He was there in seconds. "It's starting," she managed, as another pain gripped her. He didn't panic, didn't hesitate, just pulled on his boots and coat, and rode hard through the darkness to fetch Old Mary. The hours that followed blurred together, pain and pressure, and the strange animal knowledge that her body knew what to do, even if her mind was terrified. Old Mary brewed tea from the recipes in Sarah Garrett's book, bitter draughts that eased the worst of it. She pressed cool cloths to Marla's face and spoke to her in 2 languages, words of encouragement and power. Caleb stayed outside, feeding the fire, boiling water, his face drawn and pale in the flickering light. "Push now," Old Mary commanded, and Marla bore down with everything she had, her hands gripping the bed frame so hard the wood creaked. The baby came with the dawn, sliding into Old Mary's weathered hands with a thin, furious cry that filled the small house. "A son," Old Mary said, her voice soft with wonder. "A strong son." She cleaned him and wrapped him in the wool blanket Marla's mother had given her, then placed him in Marla's arms. He was perfect. Dark hair, eyes screwed shut against the light, tiny fists waving. His cry was loud and indignant, and Marla felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door she hadn't known was there. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one." Caleb appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. We're alive," Marla said, and started to cry. Not from pain, but from the sheer overwhelming fact of it. She was alive. Her son was alive. They had survived. Old Mary cleaned up efficiently, burning the bloodied linens, brewing more tea. "You rest now," she said to Marla. "I will stay 3 days to make sure, but you are strong. You will heal." Caleb brought in an armload of wood and built up the fire until the room was warm as summer. He looked at the baby for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. "What will you name him?" he asked. Marla thought of Sarah Garrett, buried in unconsecrated ground. Thought of all the women who had lived in this house at the edge, marked and shamed and forgotten. "Samuel," she said. "It means God has heard." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's a good name." "Caleb," Marla said, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you for everything. I know you don't owe me." "Stop." He crouched by the bed, meeting her eyes. "I told you, a man's got to stand for something. Besides," he glanced at the baby, then away. "My wife died in childbirth 7 years ago. Her and the baby both. I couldn't help them. So maybe this is me trying to make that right. I don't know." The room was quiet except for the fire crackling and Samuel's small snuffling sounds as he rooted against Marla's chest, searching for milk. "You helped," Marla said. "You helped us both." Old Mary smiled from her place by the fire. "The old ways say a child born from fire and pain will be strong. This one has fought already, just to live. He will do great things." Marla looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, soft and white and clean. It covered the cairn where they'd burned the rope and the signs. It covered the grave where Sarah Garrett's daughter lay sleeping. It covered the whole hard, ugly world in something new. Inside, the fire burned warm, and three people, who had all been broken in different ways, sat together in the quiet, watching a new life breathe. Survival is not the same as victory, but sometimes it is enough, and sometimes it is everything. Spring came slowly to Salvation Bend, the way truth comes to a town built on judgment. The hollyhocks grew tall behind Marla's house, their blooms the color of blood and sunset. They covered the cairn completely, a riot of petals that nodded in the wind. Travelers on the road sometimes stopped to stare at them, wondering how such beauty could grow in such hard ground. Samuel was 4 months old, fat and healthy, with his mother's dark eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. Marla carried him in a sling against her chest, while she worked the small garden she'd planted. Potatoes, beans, squash. Caleb had brought her seeds and helped turn the soil. Old Mary had taught her which herbs to grow for medicine, for tea, for the women who would come. Because they did come, quietly, after dark, when their husbands were asleep or away. Women with bruises they wouldn't explain. Women carrying babies they didn't want or couldn't feed. Women asking in whispers for the teas Sarah Garrett's grandmother had written about, the knowledge that could end a pregnancy, or ease a difficult birth, or stop a man from forcing himself on you again. Marla helped them, used the book, became what the town had already named her, witch, heathen, woman at the edge. But she did it with open eyes and steady hands. The Reverend preached against her from his pulpit, called her servant of darkness. But he didn't come back to her house. Neither did the men with ropes. Because Caleb Royce was there most days, mending fence or chopping wood, his rifle always close. Because old Mary visited often, and people remembered the old stories about what happened to men who harmed medicine women. Because little Emma Howell had told everyone who would listen that Miss Marla was kind, and the baby was sweet, and God didn't make mistakes. And because, slowly, the women of Salvation Bend began to whisper a different story. Not about sin, about survival. On the day Samuel turned 6 months old, Marla walked to the cairn and pressed her hand against the hollyhock stems. Beneath the flowers, beneath the ash of burned rope and shame, beneath the stone marked with a cross, Sarah Garrett's daughter slept in peace. "We're still here," Marla whispered. "We survived." The wind moved through the garden, and the flowers nodded like they understood. Inside the house, Caleb was teaching Samuel to grasp his finger, the old soldier's scarred face soft with something like hope. Old Mary was brewing tea, humming a song in Choctaw that had no words in English, and Marla stood in her garden of defiance, her son's weight still warm against her chest where the sling had been, and felt the truth settle into her bones. They had tried to bury her, brand her, break her, but she had planted flowers instead, and they were blooming. Some stories don't end with justice. Some end with a woman standing in a garden. She grew from ash, holding a child they said had no right to live, and refusing to disappear. What we plant in our darkest moments becomes the proof we survived them. Did this story move you? Does it make you think about the women at the edges, the ones history tried to erase? Subscribe to witness more untold tales of defiance, survival, and the quiet courage that changes everything. Hit that subscribe button and join us around the campfire where these stories live on. Because some legends are too powerful to let fade into dust. Subscribe now and carry these voices forward.